Well, Pat, we're past the halfway point. Season 2, episode 6, entitled The Old Gods and the New. Not really quite sure why, because they don't really talk a whole lot about religion in this episode. But, man, I got to say, you were saying to me that last week was a little bit of a slog. But, man, there was some big events that happened in this episode, some important events that happened in this episode. But, man, talk about an episode that was a little bit of a drag.
You know, maybe the Talkin TV audience will agree with me that last week was the old boring and this week's the new.
And every time, I think that you're going to run out of steam. You continue to impress. Just reaching for them low-hanging fruits. All of that and more. Stay tuned. You know, Pat, I feel like we're going to intimidate a lot of people into watching this episode just with how intense our thumbnail is, because this week, obviously our focus character is Tywin Lannister. So we had just this super imposing picture of Tywin, like when in this one episode where he was staring at that one henchman and he's like with just, that intense Tywin look. Like, Tywin's just one of those characters where you're just like, oh man, you better not fuck around with this guy because he's going to destroy you with just a look.
Yeah, we'll get to Tywin in a few moments. I'm pretty sure, he's part of the boring.
Really?
He's just chit chatty the whole episode.
Yeah.
He's just like, I'm gonna place a pool over there. What do you think, girl? What do you think of me redecorating? What
he
do you think?
Basically has Arya essentially running his entire battle strategy at this point. Like, I know he makes a joke about it, but like.
Yeah, but he's basically just chit-chatting the whole time with her, and it's nothing of importance. It's basically like, did you make some good stew up north?
This is in only so many words. This is one of those episodes where a lot happens. There's a lot of dialogue, and yet once again, it feels like there's nothing happening. Because unlike last season's episode 6, which was, I thought, this really interesting and different type of character piece for a very troubled and heavily disliked character, this one, once again, we're seeing the culmination of all the different events that are happening this season. There's so much that is happening. Each episode is having minimum 6 storylines, just that we can continue to push through everything. But man, this was definitely in that period of season 2 that I remember, where the first half of season 2 was so dope and everything was moving so fast and everything seemed like it was so awesome. And then the payoff started to happen and you realize, oh wait, we got to sit through like kind of certain other events before we get to the Battle of Blackwater at the end. And Blackwater's dope, but there was a lot of stuff that we had to sit through, like all the secondary storylines, like Jon meeting with the wildlings.
Dom, let's just read the script here for a moment. Fade in. Interior random room of Winterfell. Maester Ruin.
I believe the term is the rookery.
Yeah. Oh, okay. The rookery. Maester Lewin runs into the room. He stares at a piece of paper. He stares at a raven. He writes on the piece of paper.
Gets the raven out just in time.
He throws the raven out the door, and then here comes the Greyjoys.
The Ironborn.
Yes, the Ironborn.
Bran's dream. Yes, our opening scene, we are in Winterfell. Bran's dream has officially come true. It's as Osha says, the ocean has come for Winterfell with the Greyjoys having success, with Theon and his Ironborn having successfully taken Winterfell.
And props for Osha really interpreting the dream, just laying it down, like, above the wall, man. I've been interpreting the wildling dreams for years.
It's kind of crazy when you think about it, how she's never been to this place that's technically, because the wildlings always say everything south of the wall is south to them, like they even call the northerners southerners to them, and she's even able to interpret. It's like, wow, water crashing over the walls means that the Greyjoy fleet is going to invade Winterfell. Does she even know what the Greyjoys are? Like, does she even know what a Greyjoy is? Like,
well, I would assume that the reason why she's such a lovable character is because she adapts to her situation really quickly. So I believe that in the couple days or few weeks that she's been in the service of Bran, that she has really heard enough things to know what's going on. And, since she is sort of in the court of Bran, she kind of, is able to listen to the good stuff.
Yes, indeed. And it's unfortunate because, again, we see the payoff. Theon, the build to, like, Theon solidifying his hold over Winterfell is very interesting, and it's very representative of just everything that Theon is going to go on through the rest of the show. Again, we talked a lot in the earlier episodes about Theon finding himself right between a rock and a hard place, and this is the reinforcement of it, where he goes to Bran, he basically blackmails this 10-year-old kid into what's it called? Into submitting all of Winterfell before them. And it's amazing, how...
yield. I think the term they use is yielding. And it's great because Bran immediately goes, "No, I will not." And Theon sits on the bed.
You. And the crazy thing is that I almost believe Bran's fervor way more than Theon's. Like, even when he's like 11, 12 years old, Bran has more guts than Theon does.
Well, Theon gets to the edge of the bed and he's just like, "Listen, you need to yield because they're your people and, like, I'll hurt them. That's what I'm supposed to do in this situation." It's like Theon I
love how you're trying to make him sound like Ramsay. It's like Theon is way too boisterous to be that quiet.
Well, no, but he's basically, Theon is very, like, textbook about things. He's like, well, if you do that, then I got to do this. That's just the way it is. Those are the facts of life. Theon doesn't really have street smarts, I guess,
right,
is what you would call them in modern times. But in Westeros, he just has, dopey stepbrother syndrome. I don't know.
Something like that.
He just doesn't really seem to have that leadership skill that the other Starks have. And he basically explains to his enemies, like, the way things should be, which is very odd. Yeah. It's very dopey, so to speak.
And I think Bran hits him with like the line that just, like, crushes Theon instantly, which is when he turns to leave, he asks Theon, he's like, "Did you hate us the whole time?" And I'm just like, oh man, wait, I was about to say, wait to strike him right in the heart right there, like, obviously,
dagger, right?
Yeah, because
right
it's clear that even though in the moment Theon has made his choice, Theon still is obviously grappling pretty hard with this decision that he's made, as far as it's like, okay, so I've chosen the side of the Greyjoy, but, like, the Starks are only going to see this as betrayal. They're not going to understand it. It's further reinforced, obviously, when he's making his big speech towards the rest of Winterfell. Then they bring in Roderick Cassell, who unfortunately has come back from Torrhen Square and wandered right into their trap.
Yeah. And he hawks the biggest loogie right in the Theon's face.
Right into Theon's face. And he even throws, and he's constantly throwing it back at him. He's throwing everything back at him that Theon puts him as, the Starks took you in. They treated you like one of your own. And Theon is constantly fighting back. He's like, yeah, I'm just a prisoner and everything. Throughout my time here, I was nothing but a hostage and everything. And when he spits in his face, Dagmir is, Theon wants to still keep him alive. He wants to still, what's called?
Well, again,
he wants to throw him in a dungeon.
He's playing by the textbook.
Yep.
Well, if you spit on me and show disrespect, I put you in a dungeon. And everyone else is telling him, like, no, Theon, that's not how the world works.
Dagmir pulls him aside and tells him, is like, no, he can't stand for this. He's got to pay the iron price. And I feel like nothing more represents Theon's, Theon's, oh my God, what's the word that I'm looking for? Theon's turmoil, let's call it, than the scene in which he actually executes Roderick. Because, like, over the in front of Bran and Rickon too, it's a really, really sad scene. But I think Roderick,
every single execution that we've seen has been like one slice, one and done, sword swing, it's done. Ned Stark, when he took care of the wildling, or the whatchamacallit, the Men of the Night's Watch that basically went AWOL. And basically, when Ned Stark got executed, like, everybody's getting their heads chopped off in one go. But when Theon does it, he's just, such a weak character that he sucks
so bad that he can't even freaking take it off in one chop. He's like trying to chop at it like it's a thick piece of meat, and he just can't do it. And he ends up freaking, like, kicking the head off. It's one of the most embarrassing. it's one of the most embarrassing things I think I've ever seen in TV.
Yeah, and it's made even more embarrassing by Roderick's claim. It's like, well, now you're truly lost.
Now you're truly lost.
Greyjoy, like basically your enemy says that, and then you can't even properly execute him. And it just shows how much of a bumbling character Theon has become. Like, he's made the worst choice possible. And, for a minute, I was thinking, like, okay, like, Theon's being smart, he's doing his thing, and, this is sort of meant to be a triumph for him. But the way that basically the writers have, done Theon is they made his most triumphant moment really one of his most bumbling.
Yes, absolutely. And that, again, it's what sets Theon up for everything that he has to go throughout the rest of the show, where he has made his one choice, it was very clearly the wrong choice, and now he is going to suffer for the rest of the show because of it. You know, maybe not immediately, but like every single thing that continues to happen to him throughout the course of the show is going to be is going to just make him regret this decision. It's a really awesome storytelling choice that you don't see too often, where you see a character make the wrong choice, try to continue to back up that choice and make it seem like it's the right one when everyone around him is telling it that it's wrong, and then he suffers for it. Just immensely.
I think Theon gets like a high five or something towards the end of the series, right? Season 6 or 7. Like he does something good, you know, and
something like that, where he backs Yara, and that's about it. But freaking yeah. So the way that that sequence ends later on in the episode is, of course, Osha comes out, proclaims her loyalty to Theon, says that, you know, I don't want to be kept as a slave anymore. I want my freedom. She finally gives Theon what he's wanted from her since he first met her last season.
She does a little foul play, right? She's basically like, I want to be a soldier. Give me a spear. I can totally fight for you. And then he's like, no, you're just, you know, going to kill me with that spear. So that's not happening. You're just going to stay in the kitchen, so to speak. I guess that's where she was assigned. And he doesn't want to have it. And then later in the episode, you're right. You know, this is the scene where she basically is held in front of him by a soldier, and she just brazenly seduces him right in front of
without question. Like she is she is a wildling, and as we see later on in the show, the wildlings do not care about social norms the way that the rest of the Westerosi do.
Yeah, well, the line that she says is something like, we know wild things.
We know wild things. I was like, wow, did they actually just quote that movie? I'm like, that's crazy.
Yeah, so it's like Theon, of course, you know, we know his one character flaw. Yep. Well, we know all his character flaws.
Yes,
but his main one that gets him in the most trouble is just his love of women and his complete indiscretion of, like, that's the top priority. It doesn't matter that his man is standing right there. He's just going to usher him away and then turn his room into a bordello for an evening. And, you know, he doesn't care if that hurts his respect.
Yes.
And ultimately, who knows? It probably does hurt his respect with his men a little bit.
Yeah, just a little bit, because ultimately what happens is Osha manages to escape. She manages to sneak outside. She manages to pull again another one up on the one poor Ironborn guard that just happens to stumble upon her. She just has that amazing ability to just continue to seduce people and then slice their throats. She tries it later on with Ramsay. It doesn't work out so well, but she ends up killing the Ironborn soldier, and then she manages to escape alongside Bran, Rickon, Hodor, and the Dire Wolves. So at the very least, she's able to do some good there as far as that goes. So the way that this sets up for a future story, again, this is one storyline that takes place over several parts, but like Osha clearly is showing that that her loyalty is to the Starks. Like, she's definitely, you think it's probably because she's formed an attachment with Bran because of his green seer visions, right? And the fact that she comes from north of the wall, and the fact that she understands that there's more to this kid than just him being another little lord, to quote her. And that's why kind of she's willing to kind of stick her neck out for him rather than just fend for herself in this instance.
Yeah, but I also think it's given her a place, right? You know, that's relatively safe. Bran does confide in her to a certain degree, even though, you know, he is obviously the lord of the manor. So it's one of those things where she feels comfortable with Bran, and also knows that there's really, beyond Roderick, who gets murdered in this episode, there's not really that many people that can protect him, specifically after Winterfell gets taken.
Right, exactly. And that's pretty much all of Winterfell. So fast forward into our next storyline that we have north of the wall. We're finally, like I said, this entire episode, first off, this is a pretty momentous episode for the behind the scenes as well. Yeah. The second of 3 episodes written by Vanessa Taylor, and the first episode of the series directed by David Nutter, who directed famously the third hallucinatory episode of The Sopranos, Join the Club, in the first half of season 6, which is the episode where Tony is shot by Junior and is in that fugue dream state while he's in the hospital. Probably one of the best episodes of that show. And he would go on, for this season, he directs this episode or the next episode, but David Nutter would famously go on to direct some of the more iconic episodes of the series, directing The Reigns of Castamere, famously the Red Wedding episode for season 3, the Dragon Pit episode for the end of season 5, and then the first couple of episodes of the final season as well. So this guy is somebody who becomes a series mainstay, and he proves in this episode that he knows how to handle multiple different conjoining events that are like all seem to be barreling towards one conclusion.
So Dom, can I just read you my notes on the first scene above the wall?
Please do.
because it's beyond the wall. John and the crew discuss their true situation. They are just some bastards that no one cares about. And what else happens in that scene? Because they're just wandering around. They're looking for the wildlings, and
Right.
they have this kind of small conversation about people forgetting them. And was I just not paying attention today when I rewatched the episode?
I think the takeaway from this part of the conversation before they actually come across the wildlings is the fact that Corin is trying to reinforce this idea that quite a couple of other people already have for Jon, both between Tyrion and Benjen and Alistair Thorne, and to an extent the Lord Commander and all of his Night's Watch brethren, where even after everything that he's been through, Jon is still kind of in this mindset of, okay, everything that we're doing has this glorious purpose, and there is something that exists bigger than us and everything. And his time with the wildlings, which really truly is, I feel, the true breaking down at this point. But it begins here with this discussion with the half hand, basically about this idea where the half hand is like, look at where we are. Forget about this. We're in a cold, frozen fucking wasteland that will kill us. Like, stop with this idea of this, these noble pursuits and doing things for all the right reasons, right? Like, I think Martin does this very cleverly, both with Jon and Daenerys, both setting themselves up as on either sides of the world. One both so displaced from the action, one all the way to the far north, one all the way across the sea on the other side of the known world. And he sets them up in this instance where they're far enough removed from the action where they're not going to really see any real repercussions and consequences yet, but they're learning more progressively so that when they eventually do enter the game, they have slightly more of an advantage than certain of the other characters that kind of found themselves thrust in there unintentionally. Because Jon's whole thing is that he is still operating under the assumption that he can get everything done by being the best person there is. And Corin is right now disavowing him of that, basically saying everybody that tries to think that they're bigger than nature ends up getting eaten. We're not doing this because we're trying to like save the world or because, we're doing this because it's our fucking job. Because at the end of the day, no one's going to know who we are. We're going to be nameless, faceless people that history ultimately forgets about. But at the end of the day, people get to live because of our actions, and that's kind of...
You got all this in 30 seconds or whatever long that scene was.
It's really quick. It's something that I've been picking up on over the course of the action. But yeah, because that's essentially what he's telling him. He's like, yeah, no one cares about us, but our actions ultimately are the ones that end up making the difference. We are essentially the only force in Westeros that actually has the power to determine between life and death, because that's the whole purpose of the Night's Watch. It's that they exist outside of all the usual nonsense and squabbling of the realms. They're the ones that they're the ones that essentially actually do get to make a difference, because their whole purpose is simply just to serve and protect, essentially. And
let's smash cut to the other half of this thing, which
and then they come across the wildlings for the first time.
Yeah, they rip out their swords, they kill some wildlings, and they capture Ygritte.
Yeah. Who, oh man, you can tell this is the first hot girl that Jon has ever seen, because, oh man, like I get it's the whole thing of like, oh, he's not, it's a typical thing of what happens when a guy finds a girl in an unlikely position. It's like, I don't really know how to handle myself, because Corin even says it. It's like, yeah, she's a wildling. She will kill you in your sleep. But again, Jon is still operating under that old school, old world assumption. It's like, as in, treat women very courteously and protect them. Women are largely innocent figures in this world. Not here. This is his rude awakening to that. And Corin tells him, it's like, you got to execute this girl. Like, yes, they interrogate her and they manage to get some information out of her, not a lot, but ultimately,
yeah. Well, she tries to trick them and like burn those bodies, and it's like, oh, so we burn these bodies and then we let everyone know our position, and your friends come in. So she's constantly trying to trick them and do things, and I think it's very interesting because Corin does say, hey, execute her, and leaves Jon Snow to do it. And
terrible decision, by the way. I'm sorry, but worst decision so far on the half-hands part. Leaving Jon, who clearly showed hesitation the first time, and he's like, oh yeah, he can totally do it on his own. Nothing bad is going to happen there.
Well, I think Corin basically understands that Jon doesn't want to do it, and he's leaving the decision up to, hey, Jon, you do what you got to do.
Yeah, basically, it's in your hands. She's your problem.
Exactly, and I think this is a great moment because Jon actually shows mercy, and this is a moment where it makes sense for him to show mercy because he doesn't really know much about the wildlings, this is someone that he could, capture and maybe get a little more information out of. And worst case scenario, later on after they sort of travel a little bit, if she proves to be useless, then he might reconsider that execution.
Right. Well,
so I think
after only a couple of minutes of lying together, I don't think she's going to prove to be useless at all. Just given the fact that, like, even though he's in the Night's Watch and she's a wildling, I don't know who falls for who first. I have to assume that it's she falls for him first because he's just too dumb to notice anything. Because they're not even together for 5 seconds before she's already flirting with him.
Yeah, when they basically set camp because night's coming and they need to get some sleep.
Yes.
She lies there and says, "You need to snuggle because I need to keep warm."
You're right.
And she keeps adjusting herself. And,
adjusting herself.
Yeah, so clearly John, is not used to this sort of, I would say
flattery, let's call it.
Aggressive flattery that is going on here. And it's obviously she's, just playing with him and it's like, you're the captor, but she's sort of in control in that scenario by using those sort of techniques on him, because he's not really familiar with the ladies, so to speak, at this point. And so therefore she's kind of basically just kind of rubbing it in his face.
Oh, she's rubbing more than that in his face. But yeah, it's our first really major introduction to the wildlings, just their culture, their customs as a people, where it's a fact of we've really only heard a lot of hearsay about the wildlings and the fact that they're these savage people. But this is really our first instance of that. It's part of, again, my favorite part of John's arc, which is the fact of him essentially spending time with the wildlings essentially reveals to him that the wildlings are nothing more than just like any other commoners in Westeros. They just happen to be on the wrong side of the wall, and as a result kind of have this sense of freedom and independence that the rest of the residents of Westeros really don't have and really will never know. So I find it interesting that this is kind of what sets him apart from the rest of the rulers in Westeros, where even though Daenerys is somebody who has spent time with the commoners, Daenerys ultimately, all that she has known is tragedy and despair and having to deal with dissenters when it comes to ruling. John actually spent time with the commoners and manages to gain this common understanding with his people that really no other ruler in this entire show gets. And all of that context, starts here to me ultimately with his relationship that he forms with Ygritte, a relationship that I probably was also my favorite relationship of any quote unquote romantic relationship that happened on the show. Just because they had such great chemistry, they're back and forth. She just made him understand this entire new way of life that he never had before. And hey, it ended up leading to them getting married in real life. So hey, clearly something was going on there.
Yeah, I would say like this particular sequence, also it does show John's growth towards leadership. The fact that we have 2 execution scenes in this episode is not really something that's is a mistake. It's not a coincidence. Essentially we're showing John being a strong leader by basically hesitating and taking that strong strike to the stone and not really chopping her head off. Even though he chooses not to kill her, he still has a stronger blow than Theon, which is crazy.
Everyone has a stronger blow than Theon, unfortunately.
So it's very interesting to see like John and how he exercises his leadership. And obviously he's in a vacuum, right? It's just him and Ygritte, because obviously the rest of his band has moved on, to scout ahead a little bit. But Theon is bowing to the pressures. He's not really comfortable making the decision that he feels is right. He's just making decisions that people tell him to make. Hey, your men are not going to respect you, so kill this person. Why he should have just killed him. Kill his right-hand man and be like, do not speak up to me.
Yeah.
You do things my way. And that would be sort of the iron price. Like, yeah, he might lose his men, but he has to, be that man, that hard man that kills people when they disrespect him. And it's like, yes, Roderick has value. Some guy telling you that the men that already hate you are going to hate you even further, just get rid of him.
Yeah.
Obviously they don't have that many men, but Theon could have taken charge. Like, I just took Winterfell. This is how the realm works. We need to strengthen our position, or we need to move on and give back Winterfell. If he just had some confidence and took control then he would have been a leader that might have actually played, a bigger part in the Game of Thrones and not led down the path that he did. And John, above the wall, he's starting to get his confidence, make leadership, considerations that are not as popular with his fellow Knights of the Watch. And he's just being a leader. There's definitely a sense that he knows what he's doing and he makes good decisions, and he's willing to at least, be responsible for those decisions if they go the wrong way.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we see, obviously, again, the kind of the growing dissent, obviously, and differences between leadership. Theon is somebody who has been thrust into this position and it makes bad decision after bad decision. Jon is somebody who is slowly learning, all the different parts and facets that come with leadership ultimately. So now we jump ahead down to the Riverlands to Harrenhal. Again, another storyline that we are pretty divided on. I enjoy the storyline. You were not the biggest fan of storyline. And Tywin, Tywin is just surrounded.
Is not
Tywin is just surrounded by the most incompetent of incompetence, where he's dealing with Amory Lorch, Yoren's killer, and he's telling him, he's like, you can't even read well enough to differentiate between this person and this person, where Amory Lorch has, due to his inability to read, sent a letter that was meant for a Lannister ally to a Stark ally, and now they know about the upcoming Lannister strategy. And he asks Arya, to get a book of the great houses of Westeros, and Arya brings back the book before he even has to tell her which one it is, and he's like, my cupbearer can read better than you, and it leads into the scene that happens later on where Tywin has this very frank discussion with Arya about, how he taught Jaime to read, and they kind of have this back and forth talk about their fathers and everything. And again, it's this instance where it's like, I love how it happens, where it's like Tywin is of this age and is so smart, but Arya, is whip smart in her own right, and it's kind of interesting seeing their dynamic where they grow to have almost like this mutual respect for each other, even though they're on complete opposite sides. And then it's thrown off when Baelish arrives, when Littlefinger arrives, in order to bring word of everything that's happened in essentially the first half of the season, news of Renly's death, how there may be a little bit more to the rumors that there was something dark and magical involved in Renly's death. And then the biggest piece of news, obviously, the continuing of the next major plot development, which is the bringing of the Tyrells into the fold, where Tywin is still of the opinion, the Tyrells rose up against the crown, and Littlefinger's like, yes, and there will be time to punish them for that later on after we've won the war. Again, like
well, it's clear that because Lord Baelish comes in and tells the motivations, like Marjorie wants to be the queen and Loras wants revenge for Stannis killing Renly. So perfect alliance. And this is really the only breadcrumb that's brought up for the rest of the season until basically the end of the Blackwater episode. So it's, I think, very well integrated into the season, where it's like, hey, these could be future allies, and Tywin sort of dismisses that to a certain degree, but obviously Tywin is pretty crafty. So when the surprise comes in at the end of Blackwater, where basically the day is saved by Tywin, we know right here at this moment who his allies are and who really does assist helping King's Landing stay intact.
Yeah, and it also has another problem, one of my favorite blinker you'll miss it moments, where there's the moment right when Arya, who knows that Littlefinger knows what she looks like, sees Littlefinger coming in, is doing her best to keep her back to him so that he doesn't recognize her. And then there's that moment where she has to slip up and spills the wine because she's shaking, and Littlefinger looks at her, and there's that brief moment where you're like, oh no, she's caught. And then he's distracted by Tywin. And then it's that really cool little insert where they're like, oh, did he recognize her or didn't he? 9 to 10 shots says that it's Littlefinger and he recognized her, but he also knows there's like, okay, there's a reason why Arya is here. I can use this. I can put this in my back pocket and save this for later on, because I'm not going to expose this Stark girl here, right now to Tywin. What do you think his reasoning for that was? Because there's no way in hell that Littlefinger doesn't realize that it's her.
I think it's possible, but it's 50-50 in my mind. Like, obviously Lord Baelish is very observant, and I think your hypothesis makes sense that he would have recognized her. But the main thing is his real enemy is the Lannisters. So if she's there, being the cupbearer and has privy to information, maybe she's going to somehow sneak it out of Harrenhal and get it to other people. And she's going to cause issues and trouble.
Right.
Also, it's, not having Arya in King's Landing really doesn't impact his plans. It's like he already has his game going. And if she gets brought back into the fold, let's say she gets brought back to King Landing, that's another piece on the chessboard that he doesn't really need to interact with. So, if your theory is correct that he did recognize her, letting her go and letting her sort of be in Tywin's, problem probably has to do with the fact that he just doesn't need another piece to move around the board back in King's Landing.
Makes sense. Absolutely makes sense. Again, Littlefinger is a man who thrives off of chaos and confusion, and what could be more chaotic and confusing than a Stark, a very important Stark too, right under Tywin Lannister's nose. It's probably one of those like things where it's like, oh man, this could not get more poetic if I tried, especially since he was, since he was given what's it called? Since he was given, made in charge of searching for Arya outside of King's Landing, he's essentially found her. But again, Littlefinger is loyal only to himself, so he's not going to make a move unless it benefits him in some way. Unfortunately, this is a lesson that Arya is still learning, because she ends up swiping a letter that she sees on Tywin's table about Robb Stark and attempts to send it to him, but unfortunately ends up running into Amory Lorch, and Lorch sees the letter. And of course, goes to inform Tywin, and so unfortunately,
you're missing the most important part. Basically, during the taking of the letter, Tywin's asking, how did your father die?
Yes,
and her response is one of those witty responses that you like, where it's like loyalty. And we obviously, as the audience, know she's talking about Ned, but Tywin doesn't know that at that moment.
Right.
And, I think it's one of the most clever lines that Arya has in this whole situation, being the cupbearer of Tywin.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really interesting moment, again, showing Arya's love of her father, obviously, and still her loyalty towards her family. And, then
part two, listen. Oh, hey, Jagar, you got to kill this guy. What's his name? What's the guy? You got to kill
Jacket to kill Amory Lorch, and this is one of the most.
But why kill Amory Lorch? Literally, he's going to tell Tywin. So just tell Jagar to hey.
It's one of those moments where, again, just
kill Tywin now.
Her inexperience, her inexperience, and her really confusion just in general, and her lack of knowledge of what really is going on and who the important people are. She is only thinking in that moment, oh shit, I need to preserve this position that I've gained for myself. It's a very human moment, but unfortunately, it's a very stupid moment, because logistically,
I think it's one of the problems with her characters in the show. Is that, any chance that they get, they show her, they show the audience how brilliant she is. And then all of a sudden,
and then it gets completely undone by her making this idiotic decision.
Yeah,
Case in point.
I understand that she's younger and she's innocent, and she's likely going to make those mistakes. But I don't know if the show portrays that as realistically as it could.
Yeah, Arya to me is consistently a source of confusion, even in the books, because even in the books, it almost felt like Martin himself had no idea what to do with her. He made her he made her this centralized character in order to see her have her be on the peripheral of everything. But unlike Jon and Daenerys or Tyrion later on, there never really seems to be a reason for her being on the peripheral, especially because every single time they try to bring her back into the main tension, something happens and it's pushing her farther away. And now at the point where we're at with her in the books, which is where we left off with her in between seasons 5 and 6, she's still so far removed from everything that she can't. I'm still confused as to how they would even bring her back into the fold ultimately. And this is just another instance of where, okay, again, she is forced to use her basically her personal faceless man assassin to jump through the wildest of wild hoops. We thought that the last episode's kill was ridiculous. Oh my god, this is all. It almost plays out like a freaking Marx Brothers cartoon or a Marx Brothers sketch.
Last episode, he pushes the guy
off, right. Well, no, he twisted.
And then he's literally like this. He's literally like this
him off the balcony. And in this episode,
and he's winking at people.
He blows a poison dart into this guy's neck moments before he walks through the door. First of all, I just need to know the logistics of how that happened. There aren't that many instances in Game of Thrones where I need to know the logistics, but this was the one. That one is where I'm like, my guy, what the fuck? How did you pull this off? That was insane. And of course, the crazy thing in hindsight is that Arya ultimately made the worst decision by having Amory Lorch killed instead of Tywin, because now, with the way that it happened, Tywin thinks that there's an assassin after him somewhere in the ruin, and that's going to put him on high alert. So ultimately, this is one of those decisions where it's and again, this was another change in the book, because in the book, it was Polliver and some other random Lannister soldier, Polliver, the guy who took her sword, and some other random Lannister soldier that was completely inconsequential that Arya had killed, ultimately before she has the thing done. But in the book, again, I'm not going to say that it was done better in the book because it still makes no fucking sense logistically, but at the very least, it made more sense as far as like, okay, Arya is only dealing with people that have dealt personal agreements to her, rather than doing these things for necessity. The tickler, the reason why that death worked is because that was a death that felt egregious towards her directly because it was coming at one of her friends and allies. But this is a death done completely out of necessity, and it just feels, the more and more that I think about it, just absolutely ludicrous with how it's handled. But what's it called? So now we got only really two other major storylines to hit before we hit the ending again. Oh man, the cart storyline. This just gets better and better each time. But what's it called? So do you want to hit King's Landing, or do you want to hit the Riverlands first, or the Westerlands, I should say?
Yeah, just hit me up with the Westerlands. Let's do
the Westerlands. So we got a brief moment with Robb. Again, this is an episode that is tied together by two things. People unable to do proper executions and flirtations and romance, because oh man, freaking Robb, this episode is, so if episode 4 was the beginning of the end for Robb, then this episode 6 really is just the reinforcement that Robb is starting to lose focus, because we got a very Renly-esque moment where Robb is walking through the camp. He's congratulating all of his fans.
He's just like picking things up, like, I got this for you.
Picking things up. He's like, yes, look at me. I'm such a righteous king. And then he runs into Talisa, and then once again reinforcement to me that Talisa is yet another terrible character. They're just having this random BS back and forth flirtation, and as far as like, oh, Robb's like, oh, you're what's it called? You're a highborn, and she's like, oh, what gave it away? And he's like, you're not a very good liar. Just some really bad, like, romantic tension that basically said, like, the one thing that I can say towards Robb's romance is that everyone kind of gets the sense that, like, yeah, this is not going to end well for him or her ultimately. And we have Catelyn and Brienne walking up, and Catelyn has this moment where she sees what's going on, and she's like, and she subtly reminds Robb, is like, Robb, you have an oath that you have to maintain. Now is not the time to get, in order to quote one of my favorite Disney movies, Bambi, Twitter painted, by this hot foreign exotic beauty. This is like, this is war, and if we have to win, we have to keep doing this. And then of course we have Roose Bolton coming in with the letter, basically, that he's gotten from Winterfell, stating everything that happened.
Brings
there.
it back full circle to Maester Lewin's staring at the paper, staring at the raven.
He did actually get the one raven out, but
went to Bolton.
Yeah, so this is a crucial moment for Robb, because this is a moment that even after he dies, people still continue to criticize him for, which is, this is the moment where Robb ultimately had to face the decision of continuing to wage war with the Lannisters in the Riverlands, or turn back north and bring the war back to the Ironborn, because ultimately, this is Robb's moment of no return, because the problem is that either way, Robb loses, because as we see here, right, even though Robb is continuing to do well in the South, the problem is him losing the North ultimately is a massive moment of destabilization for him, where it causes his men to start to lose faith in him as to whether he can hold the North. And then ultimately, even though he does attempt to bring the offensive to the Lannisters in season 3, he's ultimately undone and betrayed by his own men, who are seeking to gain power and advantage for their own. And if he turns north, then he completely loses any advantage that he would have had against the South, and he ultimately loses the original conquest for Ned. But my question for you is, Pat, what do you think? We see ultimately what happens when Robb chooses to take Roose Bolton's advice, and that Roose Bolton will send word to his bastard son, the first that we hear of Ramsay, in order to bring the war to Winterfell and take back Winterfell without Robb having to sacrifice his position in the moment. But this is clearly, as we later learn, a power play by Roose Bolton in order to attempt to seize control of the North. But my question for you is, what do you think Robb's move here in the moment is? Because we see what happens south, but there was a chance that he might have had in order to, reclaim the North and deal with, deal with the North situation before he could have returned south. The question is, would he have even wanted to continue to return south and continue his conquest of King? Like, what do you would think happens here? Like, obviously, it's a situation where, like, there is no right answer, but.
Well, I think the issue is we have the hindsight of the rest of the Robb storyline to understand that it doesn't work out so well for him. So mainly the what if is, okay, he returns back north, And then there's this ongoing civil war where the North is its own independent entity. The South is sort of rules the other kingdoms. It might actually work out because there's no way that they're going to come up north and storm that area and try to take it, because it's just a vast amount of land, and it really, they're going to have the advantage against any southern invader.
Yes,
so I think it becomes a stalemate at that point. And, Robb would just not get any justice for Ned Stark. And there would just be this sort of hatred. So if you're thinking about like the long-term play of things, you would basically have this weak claim by Joffrey. He would be king, and probably the Game of Thrones would continue happening. Like other people would sort of try to claim the throne, get it from him. Like, still Stannis would attack King's Landing. Obviously Stannis's plan might have to change because now the North is not pressuring them. So I think it's one of those things where, I think Robb could have safely gone back north, basically dug in, solidified his rulership. And, as long as people were still willing to back him and didn't think it was like a cowardly move. But ultimately, I think it probably would have led to a situation where they could have waited out, Joffrey's leadership, because, as we've seen in this episode, Joffrey's
leadership is not too solidified.
Yeah, he doesn't really have the will of the people. So
clearly,
it's one of those things where like there are other people that hate the Lannisters. And so he could have bided his time more. And I think one of the things that's about Robb is he's young. He wants that revenge. He wants it now. He's listening to Bolton, doing
which clearly proves to be a mistake in so many different words.
In the long run, yes. So it's one of those things where, even though he proves to be a really good military commander, in terms of the overall picture and figuring out the long-term logistics, he really rushes into things. Specifically, this new relationship, he's going to, fools rush in, right? They're going to rush into this romance, even though he's promised to wed, someone else. So I think Robb is really has this one-track mind. This is what I want. I want everything. And I think that's the one downfall, is that he basically doesn't know when he's defeated, and he needs to take a step back, to basically be able to take 2 steps forward.
Absolutely, yeah. And speaking of Joffrey, that brings us into, again, King's Landing in this episode. It's a short sequence, but it's an awesome sequence. Like, I don't know. I still don't know like how the conception of this went as far as earlier in the books went, but oh man, it just, I remember reading this in the books and being like, wow, this is like just a really, really impressive sequence. Because if there was anything, I feel like in order to demonstrate just Joffrey's inability to lead and just the growing discontent of the people here, oh man, because I think that even though like a lot of people have forgotten the rest of this episode, like a lot of people still remember just how impactful this riot sequence is, because
it's great.
It is
like,
awesome.
Let's go down to the public dock and see Marcella off the
see
door.
Marcella off, right? I think that nobody wants, but is done for their protection. And then let's head on their way back, and then we're gonna have all of these peasants just jeering at us and just being pissed, throwing cow shit at Joffrey. Joffrey's of course gonna react in the worst way possible. Tyrion sees that things are about to blow up and literally tells him, like, get everyone back to the Red Keep now.
The one thing you don't say, when a riot's happening or about to happen, is kill them all. Like Joffrey did not read the room on this one. He's just like, he got hit with shit and he's just like, the cow
it's pie. It's like literally there's a moment also where the Hound grabs him and freaking where the Hound grabs him and he's like, what's it called? He's like, what are you doing? I want them dead. And he's like, they want the same for you. He just kind of reminded him, like, Joffrey is so completely out of touch of everything that's going on. And this is the moment where it's fully blown up in his face, right? We obviously see that, like, the next season, right, when the Tyrells come in and we see Marjorie's treatment of the common folks, her willingness to go out and mingle with them, which is such a stark contrast to Joffrey's approach to them. And it just, this is everything to me, this moment represents everything that is wrong with Joffrey as a ruler, just in general. And it just goes to show, because afterwards, right, Tyrion gets inside with him after Sansa's been kidnapped. He tells them, he tells for them that they can have Sansa and that he's going to have them all killed. And then he's like, you blind, bloody idiot. Like, we've had stupid kings and we've had vicious kings, but I don't think we've ever been cursed with such a thing as a stupid vicious king.
And then Joffrey's like, you can't speak to me that way.
And then Joffrey's like, they disrespected me. And he's like, they threw cow pie at you because they're starving because of a war that you started. You know, just kind of reminding him that this is kind of all of his fault. And then Joffrey's like, you were talking to a king. And then, we've had a lot of satisfying Tyrion slapping Joffrey moments, but this one takes the cake when just belts him right across the face right there. And he's like, and now I'm struck a king. Has my hand fallen from my wrist? And then, oh man, as if that wasn't already great enough, right? When he's trying to get everyone to go out and search for Sansa, we have one of the most harsh, horrific scenes that I think I've ever seen, right? Sansa's got one too many encounters with just potential rape before, you know, her ultimate rape scene happened in season 5, where she gets chased down an alleyway by these 3 commoners during the riot. Very, very brutal sequence where they get this close to doing the dirty deed before she's ultimately saved by the Hound.
Definitely, you know, it's like she's in the crowd. She gets abandoned by all the troops. They obviously want to protect Joffrey because he's the king, and also, you know, Sansa unfortunately is just really in the court to be tortured. Not even
right.
She's not important to anybody.
Sansa's season 2 arc really is thankless overall. Yeah.
And you even hear it with the way that the Hound talks about her. It's like, oh, where's the little bird? We got to put the little bird in the cage. It's just code words that are, you know, that basically dehumanize her. And I would say that the main thing is she gets, you know, chased into an alleyway. Definitely these 3 or 4 guys are their mind is focused on assaulting her.
On one thing,
And basically, if it wasn't for the Hound coming in and basically some of the most gruesome deaths this season, I think he just like punches one in the gut and like all the intestines fall.
He literally the first guy he picks up, punches through him, rips out his intestines.
It must have been a dagger, right?
It must have been.
I just didn't see it because I don't know how much of a punch you could do to get that many.
Or his chainmail. Like we don't know. That shit is sharp on the edges.
Yeah, and it's he does like this very great choreographed scene where he murders these horrific people and helps Sansa back to the royal court and to safety.
Yes, it's an absolutely badass sequence, and I love the line too that he gives Tyrion at the end, where Tyrion's like, "Well done, Clegane," and where he's sending her to be cared for, and he's like, "I didn't do it for you." I love that line where it's like, again, the Hound is somebody who we didn't really know that much about in the first season. Like we had these brief moments with him, right? But this is again continuing to reinforce this idea of who this character is ultimately, what he represents. Where even though again he is ultimately a very damaged character, he's a very brutal character as we see, but he ultimately does care for those who are innocent. But he has a very strange sense of justice and a very interesting sense of right and wrong, which brings us to
we're starting to see the frustration that's mounting up in the Hound,
right?
Like the fact that he has to fight in this scenario, that he really is killing crazed innocent people, like
right.
Obviously they're doing terrible things, like they're beating people up in the crowd, they're trying to kill people, they're trying to assault women. I think there's another shot where another woman is like dress is being ripped off in the middle of this riot.
Yeah, it's pretty gruesome.
Yeah, so like it's just like the crowd mentality. Like they're starving, they're sort of don't have good leadership. Things are a very bad situation for them.
Yeah,
and they've become, for lack of a better word, sort of animals in the street. And, the Hound is forced to kill a lot of them. Like, I think he kills like 2 or 3 people.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Before he even gets into the back alleyway to save Sansa. So,
yeah.
He's forced to kill these innocent people that just want a loaf of bread because Joffrey is too inept to rule the city.
Yeah, it's kind of tragic ultimately, and it's between this sequence and the next sequence that ultimately reinforces this idea of, again, just the innocent people suffering when the High Lords play their Game of Thrones. Case in point, the last storyline of the episode, and again, your favorite and everyone's favorite storyline, Daenerys in Karth, where this time she's finally actually going to do something. She attempts to appeal to the Spice King. She's like, look, I'm here. I need your ships in order to be able to get across the narrow sea. Zara was continuing to attempt to appeal to her. She is not having any of it. And the Spice King makes some very, frankly, honest and true points, which is that it's like, okay, you don't have any armies. You don't have any allies. You haven't been in Westeros since you were a little girl. I'm a merchant. I make my way in the world through money, not by backing, what's it called, by hopes and dreams. And she does say this really interesting sentiment.
Oh
where
yeah,
she's like,
the best line that she has this season. Oh,
where
man.
she's like, I made dragons, what's it called, hatch from nothing, and when I retake the Westeros, it will be with fire and blood ultimately. But it's not.
Well, that's not
anywhere.
the line. The line she says is, "I had a dream that I could walk these stones into a fire, and my people thought I was crazy, and then I had dragons." And at some point she says, it goes along the lines like, my dreams come true. And that's like, the final appeal. Yeah. So it's like, hey, listen, I have this dream to take Westeros, and my dream will come true. I've already proven that. And, despite the fact that she's very passionate about this and has a really awesome line in this episode, the Spice King is like, nah, talk to the hand. I'm walking away. I can't deal with your passion alone.
Right, exactly. And of course, she has the conversation with Zoro on the way back. She's like, how am I supposed to get ships and allies if no one will back me ultimately? And Zoro, And Zoro kind of informs her of once more of his own backstory. It's like, oh, I have nothing. I had to do many things in order to gain riches, and gain to this position of prominence that I have. And they walk into her apartment only to find that all of her Dothraki have been slaughtered. She runs up the stairs. Eerie is dead on the floor, and of course the dragons are missing, and surprise, surprise, have been captured. I'm sorry, everyone saw this coming. Everyone knew that this was going to happen. Like, no one trusts anyone in this friggin' city. This whole city has been suspicious from the minute that she got there. Like, was she really surprised? And of course, she has the instant memeable line that gets instantly memed, which is the whole "Where is my dragons" line. Like, again, one of the most predictable. The ending shot, we have the warlock bringing the 3 dragons up towards the House of the Undying, and it's like, I think this gets the award for like most predictable ending of any Game of Thrones episode yet.
I will say that, yes, they really placed the seed early. Like, what's the House of the Undying? Oh, it's the place where you belong,
Yes.
And then obviously,
we're gonna get you there by any means necessary.
Yeah, and it's, where are my dragons? It's like, well, it's not Rotterdam, right? It's gonna be the House of the Dead, right? It's nowhere else. It's not gonna be Space Mountain in Disney World. It's just like, there's only one place it could be. It's very transparent. And it's used as a cliffhanger for the entire episode. And it's just like, okay, but why? A better cliffhanger would have been, in my opinion, just like move the whole King's Landing seed to the end.
Yeah.
And then when Clegane says, hey, I didn't do it for you, whatever, it's like,
you know what it is?
Have it's Tyrion say, "Oh man, we're even losing our knights."
Right.
And cut to the credits.
Yeah, it's just, you know what it is? It's just another example and an attempt to make Daenerys more important this season ultimately than she really is. And the sad fact is that, at least for these first couple seasons, Daenerys is not that important of a character. So, unfortunately, I hate to bring it to an abrupt end, but unfortunately, that the episode ends quite as abruptly as we do. So that is all that we have for this episode ultimately. But I just wanted to run down a quick bit of the death count, because there are a lot of people that die in this episode.
Just one thing before you do that is, I do think Daenerys, really first couple seasons, like you say, is on the down low. But once we get past season 3 into season 4, her storylines are going to pick up, and I agree that they are really good as the show grows on.
Absolutely.
But yeah, death count, Roderick.
Death count. Oh, we got a lot of people. Roderick Cassell, the High Septon, who is literally torn apart and eaten by the residents of King's Landing, the commoners that attempt to rape Sansa, who are brutally murdered, and all the other people that are murdered by the Hound, the wildlings that Jon and Corrin and their group kill, Amory Lorch killed once again by Jack and Hagar, that random Greyjoy guard that Osha's throat she sliced, and all of Daenerys' remaining Dothraki and Eerie. God damn, this is the biggest death count that I think we've had all season long, is all that I'm going to say. And I'm amazed that I was able to keep track of all of those. But that was it. That was our most recent episode of Talkin' Thrones, episode 16, season 2, episode 6, The Old Gods and the New. What did you guys think? Whatever your thoughts are, leave them in the comment section below. Be sure to click the like button and the subscribe button. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Talkin' TV Podcast. Pat, where the good people find you?
Hey, right here on Talkin' TV, I'm Talkin' Thrones with Dom, and we're going to continue to do so until until
we finish the series.
Well, until the wheels fall off this car is what I'm about to say. Hopefully we get to the end of the series.
Wait, you mean they have it already? You mean they have it already?
But anyway, other than that, it's I keep promoting my Instagram at Patrick W. Huber. Again, I'll just say I'll post one day.
One day. And you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Movie Nerd Reviews, all one word, where I post sarcastically. You guys know what I'm going to say next. 12 seasons in a short film. Watch more fucking movies. We'll see you guys next week. Talking Thrones.